Alright, so real quick, a lot of people want to know, will the MacBook Pro 13-inch be replacing someone's MacBook Pro 16-inch? And in my case, honestly, the answer is absolutely not. And I'm going to tell you exactly why in this video. Okay, so everyone is head over heels for the new M1 Macs, including myself. But I have to be completely honest about the fact that all that glitters is not gold. Now, while on paper, specs, and benchmark numbers, the M1 is definitely crushing most of the competition, we have to be clear. These are not the real world use situations. Now, like you, I've watched countless videos of people throwing everything under the sun at the M1 Max. And in most, if not all cases, the M1 has handled just about everything. But even then, I'm not willing to trade in my MacBook Pro 16-inch for this here MacBook Pro 13-inch, and here's why. My biggest concern since the announcement day was the lack of a dedicated graphics card. Now yes, the M1 has an 8-core GPU, but it's integrated graphics and not dedicated. And yes, it's the fastest, most power efficient integrated graphics. But there's still the superior truth and performance of having a dedicated graphics card. Also, at this current point, we can't plug in an external GPU and try to take advantage of dedicated graphics processing. So I bring this up because for me, as a content creator, I push my computers most when video editing. Now the M1 can handle my typical workflow, so that's not the issue. But when I put it head to head with my MacBook Pro 16-inch, exporting the exact same project from the internal hard drive, I was absolutely shocked when the MacBook Pro 16-inch beat the M1 chip in exporting my typical 4K project workflow. Alright, to all those people who've been saying that the M1 can outperform the MacBook Pro 16-inch, listen, exact same file, we are at 91%. This is the Intel MacBook Pro 16-inch, the big boy, the thick boy, versus what is this, 58% on the M1? So, I mean, it's quite apparent that the 16-inch is still superior if you're gonna be doing high-end editing. I just finished, boom, and we still are only at, what's that, 61% on this one? I mean, everyone said the M1 wipes the floor with the MacBook Pro 16-inch, but that's not quite true. When just looking at the CPU benchmarks, yes, but when testing some true user case scenarios, no. Now let's be honest, although the 16-inch was faster, it was a lot louder. That noise right there is a big reason why people are in love with the M1. This one right here, over the Intel. The fan noise was insane, while the 13-inch M1 was quiet as ever, more power efficient, and a lot cooler to touch. So the M1 is a lot better in so many ways, but not in every way. So the 16-inch beat the M1 by about 2 minutes and 30 or so some odd seconds. This proved to me that my suspicions of the lack of dedicated graphics were valid. Now rumor is Apple is currently working on a higher core counted integrated GPU for even better performance, and this honestly is what everyone should be waiting for before going up against the 16-inch MacBook Pro with the highest, graphics card in it, and denouncing every Intel-based Mac that they own. The whole point of this video is to get you to think differently about how you adopt the brand new M1 Mac machines into your everyday life. Now, even for those who would just use it as a typical use device, web browsing, email, content consumption, homework, etc. Just consider the fact that although we do have Rosetta 2 helping us bridge the gap is still there, and more software developers have to develop for and transfer over to the new Apple Silicon architecture. That's why Apple stated at their event that this is going to take about 2 years to create a full transition. Which is why also is rumored that on the next releases of Apple products, they're gonna also have Intel-based products. Now this could be due to contract constraints and so forth, but nevertheless. With all that being said, if you're going to get a brand new M1 Mac and be a part of the early adopter club, do not get rid of your current Intel-based Mac machine. Also know that there will be a better M1 machine in the near future, and you don't want to be stuck salty wishing you waited. Which is why I'm willing to keep the $700 Mac Mini as my M1 Pro project machine, in addition to keeping all of my current Intel-based Mac machines. Basically, if you can afford to grab the M1 while also being able to get the next, better, more improved M1 release of the future while still keeping your Intel-based Macs for the few things the M1 just can't do, then go for it. And yes, I could be like, if you're just doing typical stuff and nothing extreme, go for it. But the second you run into an early adopter issue, then I wouldn't have warned you with extreme cautions like I'm doing now. Take it to heart, but ultimately do what you want to do. My name is CJ, this is CJ Unplugged. What up, players? My name is CJ, this is CJ Unplugged, and I'm a tech nerd just like you, and I have a public service announcement. Before you go run off ditching your MacBook Pro 16-inch Intel to go full in to the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1, I have a red flag. Don't do it. Simple as that. Do not do it. Watch this video first and understand why I even would say that. My name is CJ, this is CJ Unplugged, and I'm basically about to tell you guys the unplugged truth about the M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch, in my opinion and in my experience. My main point that I want to get across is, you see everybody benchmarks, the CPU definitely is crushing the Intel CPU that's inside of the MacBook Pro 16-inch. This is all on paper, this is all benchmarks. But there's a huge thing no one is mentioning by running all of these numbers and looking at the tech sheets. Everyday, real world user experience, and how this is a transition point. This is the beginning of a transition point, and we have not fully transitioned into the Apple Silicon architecture, meaning a lot of apps are not going to work. And this means that a lot of apps and a lot of hardware and a lot of things may not work properly. So trying to take your current workflow, which everything is already optimized and programmed for, and trying to switch that entire workflow over to something that's brand spanking new, everything isn't converted, is a nightmare that you are probably not willing to want to endure. Seriously. Now, a lot of things are transitioning well so far, but it's just a Band-Aid. Rosetta 2 is a Band-Aid and like a temporary bridge, but it's not the solid transition point that we are gonna have in the future. The biggest thing that no one is talking about on these M1 Macs and this M1 chip is the lack of a dedicated GPU. To all of my creators out there, to all of my people who look to do any type of photo editing and video editing and so forth, understand what we have seen is impressive. This thing performs extremely well on the Final Cut Pro architecture, and then some of the Adobe apps are okay. But let's be honest, when it comes to the GPU, it's only so many cores on this M1. And there needs to be more cores, more performance. And honestly, me personally, I think there needs to be a dedicated GPU that can operate and speak seamlessly with the M1 or the Apple Silicon architecture before like the full transition as a creator is going to be the true pro level and the true futuristic experience that we are looking for. I say this because I took this 13-inch M1, this is the base model, and I put it up against my 16-inch i7 with the top of the line graphics card on it. This thing is spec'd out to run. I didn't get the i9 because we all know i9s run hot and MacBooks don't do well with thermals. Now, here's the truth. The M1, super quiet, super smooth, it's booming, it's banging, it is capable. I'm not saying that it's not capable. But my MacBook Pro 16-inch Intel with a dedicated graphics card beat it in Final Cut Pro, exporting the exact same project on the hard drive on both machines. I threw it on there, no background rendering time for it to do a full render, all that stuff. I just put it on there and I ran both of them simultaneously, and the results were quite shocking to me. The 16-inch beat the M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch by a good long amount. It beat it good in that export speed. Now, granted, it was only by 2 minutes and some change, and at the end of the day, it's impressive that this $1,300 machine was able to keep up with my $3,000 MacBook Pro 16-inch. It makes me rethink a lot of things. And I can understand why a lot of people want to just dump the 16-inch and go all in on the M1. And to a degree, you can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like, I recommend you get an M1 as a experimental machine, because that's all these are. These were sent out into the wild, especially for like the creators, for you to experiment and test it and use it and enjoy it, and just to show off what the future will hold. I don't think it's your dedicated machine. I think it's something that you buy because there's gonna be something better in this Apple Silicon architecture coming to us. So I just wanna send out that warning and that truth and that honesty. Now, I am blown away by the M1 chips. I'm not hating on them, but I just have to be honest in the fact that I just, like, my number one worry when I saw them talking about this architecture was the graphics. You know, it's only so many cores, it's soldered on, like there's no external GPU support, there's no dedicated graphics card. Like, I wanna see a dedicated graphics card that can work with the M1 architecture. I think that, will be, But I just want to send that warning out to creators, because there's a lot of you guys are gonna see a lot of creators are telling you, oh, they're ditching their MacBook Pro 16-inch, or they're ditching their whole Intel Mac base to go Apple One Silicon. Remember, these people are privileged with multiple Apple machines, and they can probably have an Intel device on the side just in case they need it for something that won't work on the M1 architecture. I will say this, I'm not getting rid of my Intel MacBook Pros anytime soon. I'm gonna keep one of my M1 devices, and that will be the Mac Mini, because I just want to test it, use it, experience it, but I'm not going full all in. It's not smart. So I just wanted to send that out there, because I think some people are gonna be driven the wrong way, and some people are gonna be jumping head over heels in, and some people can do it, and some people shouldn't do it. Most shouldn't do it. And that's what I wanted to say. Peace.